Hello, hello. Welcome back. This is Shields, the We Project. Welcome, welcome. Today we're going to be reacting to why are there so few city states? By the City Beautiful, the channel. First time watch. If you're new here, of course, what we do is we react to videos around humanities, history, science, innovation, all the sorts. Why are there so few city states? So, what is a city state? Well, I don't know the definition per se of what constitutes a city state. I know there are things like San Marino, Monaco. I know there is the Vatican City, which is that considered a city state? I know there's city states pretty much vastly around the world, but we're going to learn two things today. What is a city state for sure? And hopefully, the answer to the question, why are there so few city states? Why aren't there city states in different countries? I mean, I think the answer is kind of obvious. I think it has to come down to the power, the bigger powers, the nations of this area will not allow for it to happen for taxation reasons, for etc. reasons. Well, let's see what the video's got to say. Hit that like button. Let's jump into it.
This video is sponsored by CuriosityStream. When you sign up, you get access to Planning Ancient Rome, my new Nebula original video. Monaco, this tiny speck of a country on the Mediterranean coast, is perhaps best known for its Monte Carlo casinos and the Grand Prix.
Iron Man 2 as well.
But Monaco's size makes it a very strange country beyond its conspicuous wealth. It's the second smallest country on the planet, at only 2.2 square kilometers. That's
Mm.
tiny, smaller than Central Park in Manhattan. But 38,000 people live there, making it the densest country. The population doubles during the day when workers from France enter the nation. Monaco has the highest GDP per capita, too, at about $166,000 per person.
Because you have to be rich to be able to afford to live here.
Monaco's uniqueness is due to its status as one of the few
And a lot of people living in apartments, like more.
remaining city states in the world, countries that are basically the size of a city. Besides Monaco, perhaps only Singapore and Vatican City qualify as true city states, though
Okay, okay. So I said San Marino. I guess that's not right.
Macau and Hong Kong have some autonomy in history as somewhat independent places. In the past, city states used to be much more common. The Mediterranean used to be ringed by them, but now Monaco is all that's left.
Mm.
Why were city states more common before? What conditions are necessary for city states to thrive? And in today's era, where metropolitan regions wield enormous wealth and power, could we be moving to a new era of city states?
What an interesting point, because as more people congregate to certain areas, maybe that area differs in terms of thought from the government which the area is positioned into. Maybe you see some sort, it just depends on the country they sit in. Like, this would never fly in the United States. We'd have martial law the next day. They wouldn't let that happen. But maybe other countries would let it happen. I don't know.
Let's take a look at a list of modern city states.
Okay.
3 truly sovereign cities exist: Monaco, Singapore, and the Vatican. I would argue that the Vatican isn't even truly a city state,
Yeah.
but an enclave state instead, as it's really just a part of the larger city of Rome.
Hmm.
And I'll put a few cities on the map here that have some degree of autonomy, though they are not fully sovereign nations.
Yeah.
One thing you might notice is that most of these cities are on or near a major coastline. Now, that's not totally surprising, as most major cities are along coastlines. But coasts are particularly important to city states. That's actually rule number 1 for city states: be on a coast, or on a river that can get you to a coast very quickly. To know why you'd be more likely to see a modern city state in New Orleans and not Wichita,
Is it because of international waters clause?
we need to go back in time to some of the earliest city states in the ancient world. Some of the earliest known city states were along the Mediterranean coast in the age of the Phoenicians and included cities like
So it's like Carthage in Roman times.
Tyre and Carthage.
Yeah.
These cities formed a loose confederation, but were independent city states that made their fortunes trading in the Mediterranean and even beyond along the Atlantic coasts. This is rule number 2. Design your city states around trade.
Have to.
These city states thrived because their individual hinterlands could not offer everything they needed to make their regions wealthy. But when cities in different regions traded with each other for goods like metals and foodstuffs, they made everyone wealthier and raised the quality of life for residents. City states of this era were lean, wealth producing machines.
This is Mesopotamia behind me, and it's nothing to do with this era. But if I was to switch this image out, it would be Carthage probably, or Venice, one of the two. Just such a beautiful, beautiful landscape that is painted right here.
With a size and government structure that maximized this goal. Ruling a large area of land that didn't have an abundance of resources was not an efficient use of capital. That's not to say inland territories and empires didn't exist at the time, and some even posed a threat to coastal city states and their wealth. But many of the city states were located in highly defensible locations.
And wasn't Venice for the longest time in the same category? We just mentioned Venice. Would say they'd be a very powerful city state back in the day, or would they be sovereign nation at that point?
Like on islands or peninsulas, that made it difficult to conquer. That's actually rule number 3. Found your city state in a geographic fortress. And you could forget about trying to take them by sea, as they all had formidable navies. The sea was their home. Nearby city states would often work together on issues like defense as well. The Phoenicians pioneered Mediterranean city states, but it was really the Greeks who mastered the concept. Greece is a place not well suited for large scale agriculture. It has poor soil, insufficient rainfall in many areas, and hilly terrain. Cities had to turn to the sea for survival. Greece also has many islands and peninsulas where one could
So many islands. We'll probably do a video in the future geographically about that, but just the Greek islands, so bad.
found a defensible city state. Some of the more prominent city states did have a hinterland, but they would be considered very small nations. For example, Attica, the name of the greater Athens area, is about the same size as the modern country of Luxembourg. It's no accident that Greek democracy grew in the era of the city state. Greeks believed cities to be the perfect size for governing. Aristotle claimed that no higher form of social union was possible than that of the city state. He believed that
Well, at a time where you don't really have mass communications and things are pretty much sanctioned into certain areas with governors.
participation in the apparatus of the state was not just a right, but a duty. A city allowed for sufficient social bonds and the ability for everyone to comprehend the extent of the state. Greeks had no real desire to grow their cities into larger nations or empires. Unfortunately for the Greeks, the empire came to them. Over in Italy, a city state named Rome began to have imperial ambitions, and by the end of the Republic had figured out how to control both land and sea. All Mediterranean city states fell to Rome, and that first era of the city state was over. It was only after the Roman Empire fell that city states re-emerged in the power vacuum. This leads us to rule number 4 for city states. Don't be near large empires. Find areas with fewer natural enemies. Italian city states like Florence, Milan, and Venice flourished in medieval Europe.
Venice.
Sandwiched between the Holy Roman Empire and the power of the Pope in Rome, these cities thrived on the ambiguity of who was in charge exactly. The governments of these city states tended to oscillate between republics and monarchies, but remained largely independent for hundreds of years. This is the era of the Medicis in Florence, and Machiavelli writing The Prince about the politics of the time. Up north, city states began to pop up along another major
Now, is this the Viking Age at this point, or right before that?
sea, the Baltic. Lubeck, Danzig, and Hamburg were prominent cities in the region from
A little
about
bit
the
before
14th
that for
to
them.
17th centuries. Just like the ancient city states, trade made them viable. They didn't have the agricultural resources of the Italian city states to the south, so they made up for it by trading timber, wax, resins, wheat, and
It's like civilization. Civilization. Looks like it.
furs. They also formed a confederation based on trade and mutual protection called the Hanseatic League. They even established extraterritorial enclaves and ports in non-league cities, such as London. They would be walled and include warehouses, churches, and worker housing. These cities are a great example of all 4 rules for successful city-states. All of them were near coasts, in generally defensible positions, engaging in trade. Many of the larger powers in the area had not coalesced into empires, so they were free to trade without much fear. This era of European city-states ended much the same way as the ancient ones. Empires grew and city-states were too small to remain sovereign. Prussia, Sweden, and Russia eventually put an end to the Hanseatic League, though Lubeck, Hamburg, and Bremen still have the words Hanseatic City in their official names.
Wow.
Hamburg and Bremen are German federal states that are fairly small, about the size of city-states, though obviously not completely independent. The notion of the modern nation-state also changed things for city-states. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648, after the devastating 30 Years' War in Europe, helped to formalize the idea of nations defined by clear boundaries. These nations were larger than individual city states. From that point on, European nations have shifted boundaries, merged, or disappeared, but the primary unit of sovereignty has been the country, not the
Hmm.
city state. Well, then, how did Monaco survive?
Yeah, or
Let's review our
Singapore.
rules for city state success. Monaco is on a coast, and Old Monaco is on a rocky peninsula, great for defense.
You can still see like the medieval castle walls right there.
And its economy eventually moved to gambling, tourism, and acting as a tax haven for rich Europeans. Now, the fourth rule is usually the trickiest, and Monaco has had its problems with it. It has been captured by the likes of Napoleon and Mussolini, but each time its independence was restored. Today, it relies on France for defense. I'm severely abridging Monaco's checkered history, and I'll post a link to more historical information. So, if Monaco and Singapore can survive as modern city states, why not other cities? Recently, people have begun to make the argument that the age of the nation state may be ending, and a new age of
Mm,
city states could emerge. This
mm.
argument often revolves around the rise of the
I could see like Abu Dhabi like being prominent, Dubai being prominent. Um, Hard to imagine many.
internet. All of this digital connectivity makes national boundaries seem arbitrary and less relevant to people's lives. We live in a globalized world where we can interact without concern for where the other person lives. The internet could be the new Mediterranean, the sea for today's global trade and communication. Where cities are and what nation they are in will matter less and less.
I feel like we just dodged the question there. Did we? Why aren't there any more city states? Because we're in. Did I miss something? Sorry.
Why not other cities? Recently, people have begun to make the argument that the age of the nation state may be ending, and a new age of city states could emerge. This argument often revolves around the rise of the internet.
Hmm.
All of this digital connectivity makes national boundaries seem arbitrary and less relevant to people's lives. We live in a globalized world where we can interact without concern for where the other person lives. The internet could be the new Mediterranean, the sea for today's global trade and communication. Where cities are and what nation they are in will matter less and less.
Okay.
And our world is urbanizing rapidly. Right now, 55% of people live in cities, and that is projected to reach 68% by 2050. All of this sounds compelling, but I think it'll be hard to completely move to a world of city states or region states. Most of my skepticism comes down to process. The institution of the nation state will not willingly allow cities to secede, national
Uh,
government to give cities more
Not in
autonomy. And
America.
I certainly think it's possible we may someday live in a future where our city is more important to our identity than our country. But what do you think? Let me know in the
No.
comments. And
No, I think we're only going to get more unified versus more tribalistic as we in, in the linear timeline of humanity. There more to
if you
this?
like this kind of video,
It's not. Um, like I feel like there's just going to be more conformity over time, especially as we go more and more into thinking more about the universe versus just us. We need to act as a species, as one Earth. I'm not saying we need to globalize right now. There's no way to do it right now, but it would be nice to have some sort of coexistence versus tribalism. Uh, and I'm not confusing tribalism with nationalism. I think being proud of your country is a great thing. I'm thinking more tribalistic in terms of can't be more altruistic as a species versus selfish, etc. Um, that's the video, guys. Interesting stuff. We learned a little bit about, I didn't know there was only 3 city states technically: Monaco, Singapore, and the Vatican State. But yeah, interesting stuff. I didn't know the things about Hamburg. I didn't know Hamburg prominent city state at one point. So the Germanic cities will have to be something we look at a little bit deeper in the future. If you made it this far, I implore you to hit that subscribe button and we can react to more content together in the future. Until next time, that's a peace out. I'll see you guys.